My name's Hala Mohideen. I'm the host of the Outwith podcast, and I'm also a subscriber to the Ferret, which is an award-winning investigative news site. And we're very proud of our new partnership with the Ferret. They're delighted to have us too. So much so that if you go to theferret.scot and subscribe using the code Outwith19, you'll get a third of an annual subscription, and you'll get 3 months if you choose a monthly subscription. So that's 3 months free or a third of an annual subscription, all by using the code Outwith19. It's a good deal. You should check them out. The Ferret are great. We're very proud to be partnered with them. Enjoy the podcast. Hello and welcome to Outwith, the podcast that takes you beyond the headlines and beyond our borders. I'm Hala Mohideen. Now, one of the challenges I've had working in television is finding images to illustrate certain stories we cover. And one of the hardest stories to illustrate in my job, at least, is homelessness. Now, this is a story we feel is very important, and whenever new data is released, such as press releases on the number of homeless children rising, for example, we do like to include this in a general news bulletin, but it's a real challenge finding the pictures to match it. So frequently, shots of people sleeping rough on the streets of a large city get used. Now, it's not ideal. It's often cliche, and oftentimes it misrepresents the problem of homelessness. But just how pervasive a problem is it? And what about our attitudes towards homelessness themselves? Now, I was chatting with a friend of mine about this in the pub, as you do, when he turned round and told me that he himself had been homeless. Now, I found this quite staggering, as he's, reasonably young, rather dapper, and firmly middle class. He's also carved out quite a successful career in comedy and television right here in Scotland, and in no way conforms to this stereotype of a homeless person that we would usually see on television. It was a real eye-opener for me and has helped me challenge my perception about how virtually anyone can fall into the trap of homelessness. And he's very kindly agreed to share his story with you as well. So, James Devoy, thank you for coming and welcome to the kitchen.
Absolute pleasure, Hannah.
We're also joined this evening by Karin Goodwin. Karin's a freelance journalist based here in Glasgow, and she writes extensively on homelessness and other social issues. So thank you, Karin, for dropping in as well.
Thanks, Helen.
James, we're going to start with you because it was your story that really kind of, I'll be honest with you, I was absolutely shocked. I thought you were lying to me to start with.
Yeah, you did, I remember.
I was like, what? What a load of rubbish. I do remember we were half cut at the time when we had this conversation.
I think I was probably more than half by that point. But
it's not a competition. It really isn't. But no, I mean, this is, we laugh and joke about it, but it is. It was a real shock. So, because you do not fit the stereotype of someone of a homeless person. So it's not that I don't remember everything that you said to me when we had this conversation, but just refresh the memory. Tell us about your story. How did you end up homeless?
Well, I suppose how it actually happened, a long and varied tale of a selection of bad decisions and odd things happening in my home, and being that unpleasant 16-year-olds, I want to leave home, and then you do, and you go, actually, I'm really bad at this, I wish I hadn't, and then my parents being like, well, too late now. And I found myself in a situation where I had nowhere to go, which isn't ideal. But I went to the social work department and then went into sheltered accommodation and sleeping in. At first, I was trying to stay with friends, sofa surfing, and then I ended up in a squat, which was quite good fun when you're 16. But now looking back, I'm like, oh, miracle you didn't die. Yeah. And then I ended up in sheltered accommodation, and I was under 18, so there's a lot more pressure on finding people under 18 shelter for the night. Not always great shelter. Some of them are pretty scary, rough places to be. And eventually ended up in specifically for under 18s shelter, which are also strange places.
It's strange they exist, to be honest with you. I mean,
well, yeah, but you've got that odd sort of that break between when you're legally allowed to leave home and when you're really they're considered an adult by the law. So you've got these 16-year-olds who have potentially left and had kids, even some of them, or but perhaps they're a little bit too vulnerable to be put in with seasoned old people, perhaps with substance abuse issues. No, there weren't plenty of substance abuse issues for under 18s as well, but I think that's the theory, and they put a little bit more pressure on social departments and people like that to find places for them. And then eventually I was housed in a thing they call supported accommodation, which is effectively a flat, which I'm air quoting, get some support in. I didn't find it particularly supportive, but it's got rules, so it sort of balances out, and there are pros and, as it transpires, quite large cons to being involved in that system under 18. And yeah, so that's sort of how it happened.
Yes. What's it? I mean, were you going to school at the time?
Oh no, absolutely
no. So
not.
you were
School's
out.
for losers. What are you talking about? No one needs education anymore. I didn't have to go back in my late 20s, my tail between my legs, going, "Can I do an access course? Go back to uni, please."
Yes, well, it works for some, doesn't work for others. But so you mentioned that it's it's a challenging environment. But I mean, it's hard for me to picture. What was it like? I mean,
it's quite hard because I look back on it, and oddly, I look back on it with quite fond memories because I was 16, 17 years old when it started. And I was quite wild. And I sort of had this idea that it was an adventure, that, this is what adults do. These life throws you these problems and you just take them on the chin because that's what grown-ups do. Now, as an actual adult, I would absolutely fall apart if that happened to me. I wouldn't know what to do. But at the time, I thought it was an adventure, but also just constant disappointment and fear that I had not grown up expecting to have. So when I first moved into Stopover was the name of the under 18 shelter I was in. The first few nights I was on the street, and then I was in...
you were on the street?
Yeah, well, yeah, I just didn't go to sleep. It wasn't like I was like, yes, technically if it had been a long-term thing, that wouldn't have worked. But as it worked then, I was like, I'll just stay up, I suppose. I've got nowhere to go. Yeah. But I got in there through the social work department, found me a place at the access point in Edinburgh, which is on Leith Street. And that's general population. Anyone can be there. And you get given this little room, which is fine. But you hear people sort of screaming up and down the corridor. It's very intimidating for a 16-year-old. And then they put me into this under 18s place where you share a room, which I hadn't done in a long time and found that a bit weird. But the first guy was a nutter, a real nutter. You have to be in there by 10. So he would come in wasted just before 10, then fall into my room. We get locked into a room together where he'd just chain smoke cigarettes. And I smoked at the time as well. And even I thought, wow, that's a lot of cigarettes. And didn't know at the time it's because he was really high. And then he left. And then I got another guy who just got out of prison. Huge guy. Like, I was 16. This guy was apparently the same age as me. He looked like my dad. Lived a hard life, this guy. Covered in tattoos, put porn all over the walls like it was a prison cell from Porridge. And then he gouged someone's eye out like 3 days later. So he went back to jail. So that was good.
Lord.
And they gave me quite a nice guy called Danny, who I was friends with for a long time. But that was the first week. And then, no, I think that was the first fortnight. And then I had a normal guy who was in with me for quite a long time. And then I got this supported accommodation flat. But I thought it was kind of an adventure. It wasn't until I was sort of quite far into the process and I realized there was no way out. There was no happy ending where this sort of gets worked out and everything goes back to normal and I get to go back to normal life. Like this trajectory I was on, I realized after about a year, there was no way to get off the train that wasn't just straight back to the start. There was no, and then he gets a job and he walks off in the sunset and he finds the girl that, works out well. That from where I was looking at it, that wasn't the case because I had to sign on to get this support and accommodation. That was the rules. You had to sign on. I remember my social worker saying you can't get a job because no job you could get could afford to pay for this flat. And there's no way to save for a deposit or anything like that. You can't get a job. There's one under 18s dole officer in Edinburgh, because obviously you're not supposed to get it till you're over 18, so it's a very specific job. He hated me. And he keeps trying to get you a job, which, yes, is his job, but also, don't be an arsehole about it. Like he knows that I would get thrown out in the street and straight back into the start and lose my job. So that's a tricky thing. You sort of turn into Spud from Train Spotting. You have to go to all these interviews and not get them. Yeah. And when they're sending you for, like, pot washing jobs, and they're like, you seem like a nice young guy, you could do that. And you're like, I'm a racist as well or something. What could not get me the job? Because I can't get a job. So that's quite tricky. And you sort of end up becoming sort of like a scam guy. You're constantly looking to ways to fankle the system so you don't lose your head. But while you're doing that, you don't evolve as a person. You never learn to clean up after myself or anything like that, because I just had this party flat that none of my friends had a flat at 17. They could come round and there was no one there to stop you. And ultimately, this is ticking clock, because as soon as you hit 18, you're out, which is what happened to me. I hit 18 and they literally let themselves into my flat while I was asleep on the sofa, and I signed off like my own eviction notice, and that was me done. And there was no sort of, oh, where are you going? Oh, I'm going here. All right, bye. And I was very lucky because a friend of mine said, come and sleep on my sofa and I was there for a few months. And then by the end of that, I managed to get off and went to college and sort things out a bit.
Crikey.
But my actual memories of it aren't there's lots of positive times I remember, because everyone was in the same sort of boat and it was nerve-wracking. But certainly in Stopover, they were quite aware that perhaps I wasn't their average dude in there, and so they sort of tried to find me someone who wasn't going to be screaming and going crazy the whole time. And so I think they did look after me a little bit, but I don't think I'd handle it quite as well anymore than I did then.
Well, I don't think even if I was that age, I would have handled that well, because I can almost in a way see, when you're younger, to try and see the adventure and see the I don't know if that's a way of coping with it, but it just seems so terrifying. There is no security, and like you say, like when you hit 18, the shutters come down, and then you really are. I mean, you must have been
back to the start.
Yeah.
If I hadn't found anywhere to go afterwards, I would have gone back to Access Point, but I wouldn't have had the advantages of being under 18, so I'd have had to go through the system that way,
right,
which can still potentially lead you to bed sits and things like that. But I think that's the path where you still can't. It's not easy to get a job. I'm sure there's ways of doing this. And I should say, this was quite a long time ago. This was
so the system may potentially have changed somewhat,
but yeah, I mean, if I'd gone back into that system, I don't think, and even the guy who I really liked, Danny, who I shared a room with, got addicted to heroin a year after we left there.
Good Lord.
I bumped into him quite recently, and he seemed okay, but he didn't have any teeth. He had a lot of kids. And you're like, okay, man, we all made choices. But he had a job again, and he was doing okay. And, I'm happy to see that he did all right. But this, he had a similar path to me, and there, but for the grace of God.
Yeah. So you managed to, I guess the sort of the answer to the story, is like, you're doing well now, James.
No, but I'm not doing that badly. I'm doing poorly for an adult man, but only because I'm not very good at this.
You're one of these creative types. You're one of these creative types. It should be said. So for listeners who are joining us from outside of Scotland, James is actually, you've been doing a web TV series, a satirical comedy, for a number of years now, and it's you're
pop up all over the place.
You do pop up all over the place, and you're a bit of a well-kept face, and you're something of a cultural icon. I sort of
that's getting on a t-shirt.
Yes, and I'm still waiting for my merchandise to come.
It's my merchandise. I said I'll give you mine.
Right, but and this is why for me there's that contrast. The contrast between the perception of homelessness and the person you are, and it just shows that anyone can kind of.
I think it's just a blip.
It can happen to anyone.
Matter. It could happen to me again. Should a check get missed and I've got nowhere to go?
Yeah.
If you've not, and I think a thing about being young as well, which makes it more dangerous potentially, is if you don't have a large family or they're not terribly close, you've not got friends. Nowadays I've got nowhere to stay, but all my friends have flats. They could potentially at least let me sleep on the sofa or something like that, or spare room. But back then, there's nowhere to go. If your family says no, your school friends can't say yes. You can be, oh, it's fine, you can stay at mine. You've really got nowhere to go, and it becomes quite dangerous. And the other thing, when you're in this situation, you're not working or you're doing whatever, it can be incredibly depressing, and you quite easily fall into having a bit too much to drink. You have nothing to do all day. Why not get drunk at the start of the day? Yeah. And as soon as you start doing that, it becomes very hard to find sheltered accommodation. I'm sure you run into this, when you see why people end up, a lot of the time it's substance abuse issues is why you don't get in there. Then you're kind of screwed because there's nothing there to help you, or there certainly wasn't back then.
Yeah.
It is one blip can just, you're done. That's it. For whatever reason, it's fallen apart a little bit too far, and hopefully you don't end up in the situation I was in, or you can get out relatively quickly. But if you do, there's not a lot. There's not a lot to be done once you're in there.
You managed to get out the situation. We'll talk about that in a second. But Karin, I mean, you've been, I don't know if you knew James's story before.
I didn't. No, I didn't.
So, I mean, you write a lot about homelessness. You write a lot about social issues. Big fan of your work, I have to say. What's your reaction really to James's story? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I'm really sorry to hear that. I mean, it probably, you kind of make light of it now and say it was a bit of an adventure, but I'm sure at the time it was pretty hard.
Bits of it, certainly, yeah.
I guess I see a lot of people who don't get out of it so easily. So as well as writing about journalism, I also do and have been doing for about 4 years a workshop at the Lodging House Mission, which is with a group of people who are mostly now in their sort of 50s, most of them, and who have been in and out of homelessness for many, many years. And I suppose what they say a lot of the time is, I was homeless 20 years ago. One particular member of my group who's fantastic and makes me laugh and has got an incredibly dark sense of humour, is incredibly well read, is incredibly intelligent, but he was first homeless about 20 years ago. He was homeless, completely homeless, as in street homeless, again quite recently. And he said that what he found was that the system was so much harder this time than it was, back then. It has changed a lot, and there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of work, particularly in Glasgow, although in lots of other places, going into trying to make systems better. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot to do as well.
There is, and the system element interests me a lot. So my sister, and she's a filmmaker and artist, and does an awful lot more for society than I do. She volunteers at a night shelter for homeless failed asylum seekers, and it's which I thought I was like, that's a very niche, very niche group. Yes, and it's crazy because you talk about how these people might have had their their asylum documents refused, or there's just no other safety net that they can fall back on, and it's sad. She comes back with these stories of these people who have mental health issues, many who have with other substance issues, but a lot of them have just been they have fallen through those cracks, and the bureaucracy and the system is almost kind of fighting against you. It was interesting hearing your story, James, about how you're battling, you're trying not to get the jobs so that you would still have the security of housing, which sounds like such a contradiction, but sometimes bureaucracy can very much work against the individual, it seems.
I mean, I've done a piece in Edinburgh about, and there's a real shortage of housing in Edinburgh. So a lot of families over the last year have been put into B&Bs, sometimes sharing beds, sharing small spaces for long periods of time. The council set up a homelessness task force, and they've got lots of kind of great words and commitments to try and change that. But the reality is, that's been the case. And I've spoken to women who've had to give up work, partly because of the financial difficulties that you talked about. They couldn't possibly pay the amount for the flats that they need to. And other people, when they've still been in B&Bs, who've had to give up work because they might do evening jobs or early morning jobs that don't work with the curfew. So they're actually physically not able to...
Because you're under curfew, that's crazy.
Yeah, I couldn't do my work with the hours that they would set me for that place. There would be no way.
So yeah, again, the same guy in the group always says to me, they kind of, prisoners, children and homeless people, those are the people that we set curfews on.
Golly.
When they're in B&Bs. So, and a lot of the time in B&Bs, the staff aren't trained necessarily to deal with vulnerable people. So you're having people arrive traumatised, potentially fleeing violence, potentially with post-traumatic stress. You've got a situation in Glasgow just now where, a lot of people are dying from, fake Valiums and things like that. So you've got all sorts of trauma unfolding in places with vulnerable people. and not an awful lot of support.
And how long would so these B&Bs, these bed and breakfasts, normally you think of a B&B, it's like a quirky hotel guest house where you can have, you would go for a weekend away and you'd stay in a B&B, but it seems like this bed and breakfast industry really is they're housing a large chunk
not bed and
of
breakfast either. I mean, it's what they're called, but they're not what you imagine when you went. I went to the Cotswolds for a long.
Yeah,
weekend.
no. So how? I mean, when a family, I mean, this is what councils and local authorities, when they will try and temporarily house someone in a B&B. I mean, how long does a person get in a bed and breakfast typically? I mean, is it?
Well, so there's under Scottish housing law, a family should spend no longer than 7 days in a B&B. But that's breached all the time, particularly in Edinburgh, because they just can't get people out fast enough. So the Ferret did an FOI into the number of families in B&Bs for longer than 7 days. And, there was over 500 breaches or something like that in a 12-month period. And in fairness to Edinburgh City Council, they're sort of holding their hands up and saying, yeah, we know it's a problem. We need to do something about it, but the housing's not there. So they may spend months, but certainly I know people that have spent over a year in a very small room where, they can put their hand out in the morning, put a kettle on, and there's a wardrobe at their end of the bed, but there's not much space for anything else that you might.
And it's not your space.
It's not your space, and you can be evicted at any time. You could, be evicted for being noisy, for having your room in too much, not keeping your room up to standard. You constantly living in the present tense. I suppose is what absolutely. You would have experienced.
One of the things I remember when I was in support accommodation, I was regularly told who I couldn't have in the house. Such and such did something wrong within this organisation. He can't come into your house. I wasn't allowed to have guests to stay over, which you can just ignore because no one's checking that much. But when you've got that sort of that idea that there are rules, this is your flat, but you can't have anyone come and stay. You can't drink. You can't do any drugs. That's all right. But there's this huge list of things you can't do, and you're well, it's not really mine, is it? It's not. I mean, there's nothing. And also, even when it happened, they literally came in, used a key, came in, made me sign my own eviction forms while I was asleep.
Which sounds kind of illegal, to be honest.
Yeah, probably whatever, but they can also throw you out for no reason. So it's it's that thing when you work in a bar and they go, oh, you didn't ring last orders. Don't need to. I can make you leave now if I want. So you've got, okay, it's probably shady. And if you ask them, they go, well, that isn't technically we did ask you if you're awake and you said, so it counts. And when you're that age, or effectively powerless and very used to being powerless, by that point I'd been bounced through the system for a variety of ways for about 2 years. So you're quite used to people going, oh, we said that would happen, but it's not going to. And you're like, all right, well, I'm not shocked by being let down by another person who said they would do something. And absolutely no faith in the system by this point. So when someone says, no, this isn't going to work, you're like, okay, well, I suppose I'll just, littlest hobo with my little knapsack out the house then, and that's all you get to do. And you just get on with it. And I was very lucky to get out of that situation with a friend of mine's largesse. But so easily, if that hadn't been, if he specifically hadn't said yes at that time, I probably would have had to have gone back. And once you start again, and over 18, it's just going to be another cycle until it doesn't work again.
And what sort of effect does it have on your your self-esteem? I mean, I know you put a very brave face on it, but having your own space really matters. It's a calming kind of, maybe for me, perhaps not for others, but, having somewhere you think, I can go here and then I'll be safe, this is my space. And that has a kind of anchoring certain feeling. And the reason I ask is because I know when it was a few years ago when I first moved to another country for work, I was, sofa surfing with a friend until I could find my own accommodation. It's incredibly difficult to find accommodation in Paris because you don't have the right paperwork. So I was, had a good job, I was earning good money, but I didn't have an address, so I couldn't get a bank account. I didn't have a bank account, so I couldn't get an address. And it's that sort of catch-22. And I had a good job paying good money, and I was stressed and anxious about it. And it took a long time to get settled.
Well, I think the thing about homelessness is very well named because it's a lack of home. It's not necessarily a lack of a house or a roof or four walls or whatever, or even a bed. It's that you just don't know, you don't belong anywhere. So you're like, okay, fine, well, this is shelter. But that's not, it's not enough to survive on when you're a human being. You know, we're social animals and you've got this thing. And it definitely stunted me in a lot of ways. Like I say, like I didn't take, even once I was in my own flat, I didn't take it very seriously because I said, well, this could just go away. And so I didn't pay your rent. And so, well, why bother? You're just going to take it. It doesn't bother me because you know, and so, well, I drank it, whatever. You didn't clean up. No, it's just smash the plates. It's, you know, all of this is temporary and ephemeral. It took me quite a long time to get over this idea that things don't just go away when you're not paying attention. And I think homelessness is the thing. And I get why you see pictures of people on the street, because most people, that's the interaction you would have with homelessness. People aren't walking past bed and breakfasts and going, oh, well, that's where... You wouldn't believe the number of families crammed into these tiny little box rooms in there. No, because you can't see them. But someone's asleep in front of H&M and you're like, they shouldn't be asleep. And so, fine, whatever. Or putting up those things that stop homeless people sleeping somewhere. And you're like, absolute prick has to be like, oh, I'm going to put up stuff so you can't sleep on the ground at night. It's the ground. They're already not keen. They're not like, oh, that's a great place to sleep outside in the cold in Scotland.
Yes.
That people see that, and it's come up quite a lot, especially since, you know, working in TV and in news and things like that. And people go, well, that's a story. Why don't we talk about homelessness? And the reason quite often is because middle-class producer has seen a lot of homeless people, and they're like, oh, why is that happening? And this is the very tip of quite a complicated iceberg. Yeah. And not seeing a problem I saw quite recently there was something on TV with a journalist who wanted to go out and did go out and spend a night sleeping rough in Glasgow with people and say, what a shocking discovery you made. It's rubbish.
Yes.
Yeah, it is rubbish.
Also,
it is rubbish.
I mean, I also feel that they could actually ask homeless people themselves what they think. But also, I think the thing about even by seeing people who are on the street, I mean, the estimate is only about half of the people who you might see in the street during the day are street homeless, won't have somewhere to stay that night. So the complication of adding that layer of begging in, and those people may or may not be in other temporary accommodation, likely to be in some kind of temporary accommodation.
I can't think of how many times as well, like if I'm out with friends or my mum or something like that and walking on the street and they'll see someone having a big issue and you'll get, I bet they're not really homeless. Well, they've not got a great job. I wouldn't worry about it.
Which has become a really worrying part of the rhetoric.
It has, hasn't it?
Yeah. Look at his shoes. He's got 2 nice shoes. He can't be homeless.
Yeah. And is that because of our perception of, you know, homelessness as someone is a person who's sleeping on the street? So if you see someone who's, you know, perhaps not as destitute as in your Charles Dickens imagination.
I mean, I think it's political. I think there's a definite attack on people who, you know, so you create a deserving and undeserving poor. I mean, James is completely right in that homelessness can happen to anyone, but it's still much more likely to happen to you if you come from a background of deprivation. If you don't have all the network of family and friends, if your family and friends already have substance misuse issues, if they've got mental health problems, you know, as you grow up, I see incredible solidarity around the people, for example, in the Lodging House Mission, who will help each other out when they have nothing. I mean, a number of times I'll leave my mobile phone lying on the table and someone will pick it up and give it back to me and say, keep that safe, you know. And people are really supportive of each other, but they've all got less. Whereas, you know, they don't necessarily have a spare room that you can sleep on, although lots of people have told me that, oh yeah, that's so-and-so, I used to let them sleep in my sofa, in my temporary furnished flats. So there is still a great kind of inequality that's absolutely built into homelessness.
So how do we, I mean, I imagine there's lots of things. There's no one thing that causes homelessness. I mean, it's a much more complex problem than initially most people would believe. It can happen to anyone. You know, there's so many things that can cause an individual or a family even to become homeless. Do we need to understand what's behind it before we can attempt to turn it round? I don't know how to. You always want to fix something, you know. You want to fix it and make it right. So
yeah. I think there's too many ways for it to happen to try and preventatively step in, because quite often, you know, if you can see it coming, you can take steps to prevent it. It's the surprises that get you.
But that's one of the issues actually right there. So one of the incredibly frustrating things for some of the mothers that I was speaking to in Edinburgh is that they would get an eviction notice, and they would sometimes get up to 2 months notice on their flat. So they would phone the council, and the council would say, that's fine, just come back when you're homeless. And so they would know, and they would sit this whole time. And then so the van would arrive to take their stuff into storage on the same day as they were meant to be sitting in the housing office. And all of this would happen at once rather than a preventative approach. And so some of the recommendations that came out through the Scottish Government's Action Group, and there's a whole set of recommendations that have been accepted by the Scottish Government, was to put preventative measures into the law, basically. So that's one really kind of key thing that we could do, is to do a lot more in terms of prevention and to actually act when people know that there's going to be a problem down the line, rather than wait for it to hit.
Like a systemic sort of something that needs to happen within the system.
Yeah, sure. But also just a recognition, I suppose, within casework teams and people that are seeing people that it's not okay just to sit and wait until someone's in crisis. That's become so normalised, I think.
Do you think there's much more of that now? We're just waiting until it hits the right sort of, where you can press the button, okay, now we can do this. Now we can take the action to go to the next step.
It's just, I think it's always been like that.
And I think it happens not just at that level, which isn't how I ended up there, so I didn't know, but there's certainly other parts of that system where I would be there and they go, oh, it's okay, we can flick that switch or push that button now. Oh, that's happened there. This is on. I ended up with a disproportionately good flat because they messed up, and they were terrified that they'd messed up, and perhaps I could have done something about that. But I went, fine. Well, I'm not shocked, but you're only allowed to stay for 8 weeks in these shelter things, and I was there for 10 by the end, and we just have to find them somewhere because just mistakes happen. But it's absolutely like, well, it doesn't matter. And I said, well, this is insane. Like, it was a crazy good flat that they gave me. And I'm like, there's no way on earth that this makes sense for me to have this, but also I'm not capable of looking after this. This is a grown-up adult man. I couldn't look after that size of flat now. And I moved because this is too much. But and then you get that thing of like, well, you can't leave. There's nothing you can do to leave now. I could have gone into education, but with no, I could have gone and done a college course or something, but that was all I could have done. But again, you've got no travel money. So the idea of getting to college or anything like that, you've got no food money. So I would this is before the time of food banks, but you used to get food parcels. So you've got very little energy going about your day because you're not eating well. You're not, as a chain smoker at the time, everything I got went into fags. And it's just that, and you just, you just live moment to moment, second to second. They're like, oh, we'll think about the future. And it's like, I'm not that confident on the weekend yet. Yeah. So it's not... well,
you're just trying to get to the end of the day.
Absolutely. But you do get into this thing where there's no way out. So once you're there, you cannot, or at least I never figured out a way out of that system except support from out with that system. And that doesn't sound like a system that can possibly, that's not functioning.
So what the aim is to do is to introduce Housing First. I don't know if you've heard about Housing First, which is a model that started in quite a lot in the States and in Finland. They use it really successfully. So Finland have kind of really massively reduced homelessness by the very simple thing of giving someone a flat from the first day they're homeless and putting the support around them that they need, rather than, as you say, going through this system, this ladder, step by step, where you're stuck and you fear at any point falling off and ending up like going down a little snake right straight back to the bottom. So the idea of Housing First is that they'll give you, the flat where you're going to stay and where it's going to be a home rather than just a house. Again, we've still got quite a long way to get there.
Yeah, because where do you get the housing stock from? Really, it's, that's a massive challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, all of the local authorities in Scotland should now have an action plan. I don't know if they do or not. I'm not sure. But they should they're all signed up in theory.
But as you were saying, you're working with people that are 50 years old and they've been in the system for a very long time.
Yeah.
If, I'm not saying that there aren't always people out there like, I don't want to get a job or get a house. And okay, fine. That's everyone's got choice and these things happen in any system. Yeah. But if there's people who like, I don't want to live like this and you are, and you've been doing it for 20 years, the system isn't working. If you were like, I'm keen to get out of the system, I would like to have enough money, rent my own flat and settle into that. And for no fault of their own, they haven't succeeded in that. And we've got a system that is supposed to be supporting them into that situation, and they've not done it. The system is broken. That's like if you go to school for 20 years and you I can't read. Why not? Oh, it just didn't come up in the last 20 years of being at school. And I said, well, it's not a very good education system then, is it? These things, if the system is there to get us out of these horrible situations and it doesn't do it and instead just keeps us repeating it, which costs a fortune. This system is costing a huge amount of money, and at the end of it, it's still broken. Why? It seems crazy to me.
So in terms of how we tackle this, I mean, does this these kind of solutions, do they have to come in at a governmental level, or is there other things that could be happening? I remember about a year ago, or there was the big drive for there's a social enterprise, Social Bites they organised a big sleep out charity and all this. And one of their solutions was, people with a spare room could open up. This is something that came when I interviewed, to help take in a homeless person for a night. I mean, are these kind of small actions, are these I'll say as well, that was not the only solution that they gave. I'll be very clear.
They've
Social
got
Bite
prefab housing.
Yeah, they do. They do a lot of work, and I think they're very committed to. They're really rolling up their sleeves and doing this kind of thing. But when you see this kind of problem, and it's not nice walking down Byres Road, and there's you're just lined with people.
In Glasgow, you're right.
Well, let's leave the Glasgow Edinburgh for another time.
Edinburgh's got bigger homes.
Yes, but it's not nice, and you do want to help. You do. I mean, where does the action have to come from?
I think I don't know how you feel, James, but I feel really strongly that people need to stop thinking about solutions and listen to homeless people themselves. Because I think there's a lot of people who really genuinely from their heart really want to help. And that is really great. But also they need to ask what people need and to act in solidarity with them rather than do good for them. Because I just think that's what will change things. Actually listening to people like James who are experts in it, who know how it feels to be homeless, who know what they need, who know the system in a way that none of us know. I mean, the things that people tell me, the depth, the detail, and you would walk past those people and not give them the credit for who they are and what they know. And that's gradually changing, but I think stopping and listening would be like a really good start.
I think there's a lot of it's come together in a lot of ways. You've got social workers coming in going, so I was a fairly young, well-spoken, if not educated guy who was, I'm quite happy if I'll work if I get a flat at the end of it, but I can't work and live in the flat. There's conversations, but they're utterly frazzled trying to deal with all these things at the same time as doing other stuff, and all it's this huge pile of issues. And Children and Families got a massive remit. The social department, it's got a big remit to be trying to deal with something. If you make it all into one thing, if you try and homogenize it with every other issue that can run into it, it becomes far too big, far too sort of huge problem to try and deal with. And actually, stories like mine and the research you've done into it and things like that, you start to split up and go, well, it's not necessarily, these aren't insurmountable problems that we're looking at. They're just not the same problem. And if you use a one big brush to try and clear, we've dealt with poorness and homelessness, it's all done, that's fine, I've colored that one in, it's never going to work. But if you take things into, compartmentalize them into what problems can we deal with, I don't think they're that, it's not, I'm not saying in any way easy, but they are manageable problems. Yeah. But if you're trying to solve society, you're never going to fix that. But if you can go, okay, well, this is X, and then you get, whenever there's an investment, sadly, from the government, you get people going, oh, well, they're just stealing. Well, I've got a job and I've got a flat, and so if they've not, they're probably all junkies. And you're like, well, the problem with it is homelessness will cause you to become a junkie. It's not how you got there. It's what ends up happening when you hit the absolute rock bottom and you've got nowhere to go. I'm not saying it causes it in everyone, but I'm saying
also
it can
if you can't get help for your mental health.
And mental health issues, absolutely. And
that whole
and
thing
then it's
where
self-perpetuating, isn't it?
You can't get help from mental health because they say you've got a drug addiction, and you can't get help from the drug clinic because you've got undiagnosed mental health issues. And
that's what gets you thrown out of homeless shelters as well. You can stay in a lot of most places. You can stay in a homeless shelter unless you have a problem with alcohol abuse, violence, or drug abuse. And as soon as you get that tick, you're out and you're not coming back ever. So then you're on the street, and then you're not going to turn your life around while you're sleeping on the street, thinking, maybe I should try and kick all that addictions out. That person, and they're off the list. They're off the how are we going to deal with this guy? We don't deal with that guy. He's not. Press the button, he's gone. And then people, why have we got people sleeping in the street? I'm not. It's not in all cases,
I know.
but
I'm just saying. I find it really important to say to people as well, and to remind them that it's every local authority has a duty to house every single person.
I'm not saying that
they don't always meet that duty, and Glasgow City Council breached it 3,000 times, something like that. I mean, most of the breaches that have been recorded were in Glasgow, but there is a right. There is a right to housing there. They shouldn't be able to, and so I think sometimes that gets forgotten when you see people on the street and you think, oh God, they can't get any housing. There's not any housing. Well, it shouldn't really matter. There's not any housing. There's laws in place. Yeah, that say that they should be housed.
In terms of, you guys mentioned perception, you can't paint the broad brush on this. It's there are so many different intricacies. There's so many reasons behind it. Do you think that when it comes to talking about homelessness, and I say the word homeless, and the mental image in my head is someone curled up in a blanket in the doorway of a betting shop. That's the stereotype, and that's the image we have. Do you think we're doing enough to understand, I say the general public, to understand who is homeless, the fact that there is no typical homeless person? And do you think that there's a role to be had in the way we treat the story and the way we cover the story?
It's interesting that you say that's what you think of, because it's what I think of as well.
Right.
Like when someone says homelessness to me, there's still part of my brain, because I watch the news and I see that's what you get. Someone says homeless, picture pops up, sad, hoodie, got a blanket, maybe a dog. That's what I think of immediately. And then I have to take a beat and go, oh no, that's me as well. Yeah. So it's so pervasive, the way the media has, and I think it's an easy photo. It's good for very quick visual storytelling to go, this is what I mean. And it's normally what people mean as well when they say homelessness. They do mean that. That it's in everyone's psyche. And I don't know. I think the story is so much more complicated than you sleep outside. I understand what that would be. That would be horrible. But then you get into the intricacies of, you stay in a bed and breakfast. Well, I've stayed in a bed. It's not that bad. I've stayed in some pretty rubbish flats myself, and then you get into this, bedsit's not rubbish. Yeah, that's okay. It's not really homeless, is it? And then, such and such is selling the big issue, but I'm sure I saw her up the town the other night having a drink. And it's all these, and then it becomes, I think it's a very difficult story to tell, because like everything, it so involves people, and it involves so many different people for so many different reasons, and for so many, how do you concisely tell that story without, however long this has gone on for?
Do you think that we could be doing this better?
Yeah, sure, of course I do.
Yeah.
I think imagery matters, and I think some organisations have done really well. For example, some of the violence against women organisations have really mobilised to help public perception better understand things like coercive control being part of a spectrum of domestic abuse and violence, by creating, for example, a bank of images that they've encouraged the media to use. There needs to be, I think, a bit more of a proactive push on always talking about different types of homelessness. I guess the difficulty for the media is you tend to cover crisis because of the way news agendas are set. And so although there were 35,000 homeless applications made, and about 2,000, I think, roughly, had been sleeping rough in the 3 months before they made their housing application. So it is, disproportionate. But those are the stories that really kind of are about crisis, and you end up with more media coverage. So it's difficult.
It is a difficult one, and I speak and I know there are many different types of media. So you have, obviously sort of print and radio. Then that's different. But in television, it's all about the pictures. And whenever we do these stories, I mentioned in the introduction, none of us likes getting these press releases saying the amount of homeless children before Christmas has now gone up X%. And, we want to talk about it. We want to be able to, we want to be able to get these stories out there. We want other people to care. But when you are working in television, how do you do it? That's unless you've got like a really slick graphics team who can try and do like a really nice animation, which is hard to do at 4:45 in the morning. It is a challenge, and especially because certainly a lot of newsrooms, certainly the newsrooms that I've worked in, not just here in the UK but worldwide, you don't have that much time at your disposal, and you often don't have the resources you'd like at your disposal, and so you're trying to tell these stories, you're trying to help, communicate these things. And oftentimes, yes, it is in crisis. But, we want to do better. I mean, that's the end thing. It's just,
And you do need to invest the time in order to get people's trust and, and give people a good experience of being involved in media, and give them more agency to be involved in that, in order that when you need them like that, they will say, yeah, come and film.
It was when you were saying there about, seeing the figures for homeless kids before Christmas, so horrible. But something I have noticed that the media has tried to tackle in different ways is food banks. Because when we first started hearing about food banks and they became a sort of thing, you're like, oh, that's for, super poor people and the homeless, and like soup kitchens is what we all thought. And then over time it comes out and says, no, there's a lot of people that work parent families working full time who are going to the food banks all the time to get to get enough just to survive. And I think that story shows every issue where people go, oh, it's that. Oh, it's a soup kitchen. It's a modern day soup kitchen. Yeah. You expand that out to being, no, this is everyone. And I think it's similar with homelessness. If you think that homelessness is people on the streets, then you get this tiny little bit. But if you get this whole thing going, it's good. This is everyone. This is someone who's lost their house. Like you say, families are outside. And I think if people went, families are homeless, if you could see that, people go, oh, well, that has to change. You can't have toddlers running about with mum and dad in this tiny little room. But if you think of...
Because again, the stereotype is one individual.
Yeah, one guy, young, quite often like guy in his 20s or something like that, with a badly written sign, looking miserable. And people are like, well, I wonder if he's really homeless. Even that guy who's sitting in the rain outside, you're still like, but maybe not. Actually, this problem is far bigger than that. And when I was there, I'm the best possible person to be in that situation. I've always had this voice. Fairly middle class, normal guy. This isn't going to be that tough for me to get out of this. The worst comes to the worst, I'll probably get away with this. But for so many, it's just never. It's not going to be.
And did you meet a lot of young people in care when you were at that stage? Because that's the other thing. I mean, particularly 20 years ago, the law would have been that you would have left care at 16. Yeah. Still, people leave care about 17.
When I was in Stopover, it wasn't some. There were a few people that had moved to the city because they were in trouble in other cities.
Gosh.
There were a few people that there was a couple that were pregnant, but they couldn't sleep in the same room because it was an under 18s place. Even though I'm fairly confident they probably had sex at some point previously, unless it's Jesus, but I doubt it. There was there was a variety of people that had just come out of prison as well. I think people had been in care, but I hadn't had anyone that had come straight from it and in, probably because they just organised. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to do that interim stage. When they were coming to the end of their care, they probably organised for them to go on to something. It didn't happen to be that way, but I think there were only 16 of us in Stopover at the time. And I remember looking into it for a story about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's moved location and is now far bigger than it was when I was there.
Do you think it's more of a problem now?
I couldn't say. I'm shocked by how many people it's come up with, much like when we were just sitting in the pub, and there's other people who are more successful than me or work in a similar industry and stuff like that, and I bring up and go, oh, that happened to me. And he goes, sorry, what? And he goes, oh yeah, it goes almost exactly the same story as you're describing happened to me. So it's certainly more common than you'd think in groups of people that you wouldn't expect it from. You were surprised because it hadn't come up, but I can think of 5 people who, in a lineup, you'd think we all fairly similar jobs, coming from the same background, who almost exactly the same thing as me happened to. It's just one little mistake, and then you got to get through it.
That's crazy.
And you'd never know who they were. I know that we have both worked with someone, and you go, wow, I had no idea. But it's not something that comes up a lot. But yeah, I think I don't know if it's more likely. I imagine as sanctions get tighter and things like that, I
Yeah.
imagine it'll happen more and more. I don't remember what the late 90s, early 90s was like for it.
It's been relatively stable for a while, and it's just started to there's, I think, 1% rise in the latest figures. But I mean, the predictions from there's some great researchers at places like Heriot-Watt University have worked with Crisis, and they're predicting massive increase as we see, continued lack of investment in social housing. Welfare system, as you said, that you've got sanctions, you've got conditions that are so difficult to deal with. I mean, people being told that they're fit for work when they're clearly not, and then having to spend 35 hours a week looking for work. And if they don't manage to record those 35 hours on an online journal, and they may or may not have IT skills
or
computer
even access to a computer is the other hurdle in that.
So even just accessing the benefit system, there's all sorts of things that currently in the current climate, I think, are really tough.
Saying earlier on, you learn to be an excellent liar.
Yeah.
And that's not a great skill to give to people, is become a consummate bullshit artist, because you've got these problems where you're like,
and it's so
I
much
missed a thing.
harder than it was.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. There was no computers when I was doing it. No one was double. I wrote it in this book. I have bad handwriting, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And then they say, okay, fine, whatever. But
But it's true. The system is certainly in the UK. It has become. There have been some significant changes with the benefit system. We talk about sanctions. So this is a penalty that's applied if you're found to not be, looking complying with your contract.
But it could be that might be that you missed a call on your mobile phone telling you that you had to phone the job centre back, and you didn't do it within the allotted time, and that it's automatic sanction. Or it could be that you're told to go to a particular job interview and you were 5 minutes late because your bus didn't turn up, or
It's these little things which
you're
are
not ill enough to be signed off ill, and then you die. This is how many times have we read that story recently? This person was deemed fit to go back to work and immediately died because they couldn't go back to work. And you're like, well, what? Who's checking that?
Yeah.
And it's not like, they had a gammy leg and they fell over. It's like, no, huge heart failure on a massive scale because they were.
So there are systemic issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Karen, do you think that a lot of the changes that we've had in the benefit system is contributing to homelessness? Is this something that's?
I mean, I've not looked specifically at that issue on an anecdotal scale. I suppose the people that I've been working with most closely, I see them really struggling. It's kind of heartbreaking to watch that.
Yeah.
And I haven't really interviewed anyone who's when I've been working on a homeless story who hasn't had some kind of struggle with benefit system. So I think they are quite linked.
It just seems like such just an enormous struggle. And when you're in this vulnerable space, because, let's not kid ourselves. If you find yourself in that situation, you're enormously vulnerable. Whether
and just
you're
having
young,
to have all your paperwork and you've got nowhere for that to be.
Yeah.
It's an absolute house of cards. One thing goes wrong, and especially now, when I was younger, it was easier. You could go and you talk to a real person and you could try and win an argument. But nowadays, they just
can't do that.
You can't do it.
I remember trying to sign on in 2011 or something. This is even, we had computers
before
by then.
universal credit.
But you had to, this is before universal credit, which is the big shift. And, just trying to, fortunately, I was staying with my mum and my father. So I had access to a phone. But, you're sitting on one of these automated call lines that charges, I don't know how many pence per minute. It wasn't a cheap call or a free call. And you're sat there pushing buttons then to fall on an answer machine, or the call gets cut off and you have to start again, and you have to declare yourself 7 days before this. And even just being faced with those, this is, just signing on for benefits was enormously challenging. And when you're feeling vulnerable like that, nobody wants to be claiming benefits. No one wants to be reliant on
it's part of the
state.
Well.
But
So if you're out of work, I work freelance. If you're at work, you have to sign on so that you get your national insurance. So it's not like I'm like, I'm desperate for the cash, but you need to have the full national insurance thing signed up. So, but it's an hour and a half bus ride from where I was living. At 2 buses, an hour and a half, and that's. Yeah. So that's 4 buses there and back. That's quite a lot of money when you've not got any money. It's nearly a tenner on the bus. and it takes an hour and a half to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's really convenient to get to the other side of Edinburgh at any time.
Yeah.
And also in the middle of the day. And you're like, I thought, you want me to go job hunting? No, 10:30 in the morning. You're like, so leaving at 9, not going to get any job hunting done till 12. Cheers, guys.
It sounds like there's a lot of obstacles. Is there anything that's happening that's making things easier? Karin, you're writing about this, but you're on the front line.
Yeah.
Is there any glimmers of hope?
I think there are. I mean, for a start, we live in Scotland. We have had groundbreaking legislation in Scotland since 2012 that says that everyone has the right, if they're, not judged to be intentionally homeless, to be accommodated by their local authority. So that's brilliant. And we're just having, a consultation going through just now about dropping the both the intentionality and the local connection elements of that, which would mean that more people had the right to accommodation. We've had Scottish Government having this big review of, asking an action group on what they should be doing. So there's political will. That's a good thing. There's things like Housing First and a commitment to that, which is really positive. And there are people beginning to sort of recognise the need to hear more from homeless people themselves. People like the Glasgow Homelessness Network have been doing big consultations with people who are homeless and asking them, what do you need? What do you think? So there's definitely
What do they say? What do the homeless people
Well, I think,
homeless people, all of them, everyone. I imagine we have a
I
very
think that's the thing that we've been saying this whole time, is that everybody's got a slightly different, diverse experience. And that I guess what I always feel is that I come away feeling like there's no one solution fits all kind of thing. And it is about how do we even things up a bit so that you can get the support you need and be listened to without it just being, this is the only thing on offer.
It's a huge drain on society to pay and house all these people, which I'm happy that we don't leave them, but it's such a hard system to get out of. If we're not investing in the full, if you don't give it the whole thing and get them back out, then this is just a never-ending
it's
half measure. Yeah, it's horrible. Like I was like, it's a bit of an adventure. It was a bit of an adventure, but it's not like I want to do it again. I'm good. That's fine. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. It's I got through it, but there's other things I've done in my life where I'm like, don't need to do that again.
And just like, like seeing families go through it, and that statistically children who are homeless and they're as kids are more likely to be homeless as adults. And you just think, you just imagine your own children leaving in the morning with a bag and not knowing where they're going to go and how that would affect them and, in a longer term. And then you look at grown men who make me laugh so much and who've got all this potential to be living great lives, but are like rumbling around trying to work out how to have a home.
You've got very little self-worth. It's very hard to talk to someone. Turn around to a new person and say, oh, hi, my name's James.
Yes.
And so what do you do? Well, I stay in shelter accommodation. I don't have a job. I don't have any money. And I've got basically no prospects or a future. So what do you do? It's very hard to start up a new friendship like that.
So you become institutionalized and you're speaking to people who are also in the same boat as you.
Or not speaking to anyone. It's very easy to get depressed and just go, I'm tuning out. I'm just going to sit and watch TV for the rest of my life. Yeah. I became incredibly knowledgeable about garden bowls over the time that I stayed in honestly, there was maybe a year of my life where I could talk about garden bowls with like anyone who wanted to have a conversation about me. I knew everyone's name. I knew like average rankings. That is how lonely you get when you're sitting at home being homeless.
It could have been a whole new podcast here.
It could have actually.
I mean, everyone except me would have hated it, but I would have loved it. I could really get into 2000 to 2001 international garden bowls.
The scene may have changed in that time, but this is certainly a project for you to take on.
It probably hasn't. Looking at them, I'm like, that's probably the same guy's doing it.
Do you know what? I've even written a piece about it. I could have been here too.
Oh.
Well, there's one that we could redo for another time then. My goodness, garden bowls, eh? I didn't realise they televised that.
Oh, yeah. You check out I don't know if they do anymore, but
I don't know.
They did for that year. It was garden bowls. Then the snooker would come off. I changed over to Quincy.
Anyway, think of what James could have been doing instead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is, well, let's look at that because, it's, you have managed to pull yourself out of it. You have, well,
I got out of it.
you got out of it.
I certainly didn't do
you
it
were,
on my own.
were you were helped. So tell us about that, because I feel we're very, this is a rather upsetting and depressing conversation to have, and I'm one of these people that I like looking for the sunshine and the sparkles and putting a nice spin on it. So you are no longer homeless now.
That's
so let's focus on that positive. How did you do it?
When it came to the end, so while I was homeless, I ended up in a youth theatre, which was very good at the Lyceum in Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I met a lot of nice people. And when it came time to leave that flat, and a guy there, Mike, said, "You can come and sleep on my sofa," which I did. And then I went to college. And while I was staying in his house, we both got into college, and because I went to college, it gave me enough money in a grant and a loan to move out, and so then sort of life just continued as it should have done for your average 18-year-old. Went to college after what would have been school but wasn't, and I sort of got back onto that fairly normal track. And once I was on that, I built up a relationship with my parents again, and things pretty normal after that. But if it hadn't been for him saying you can come round, I would have had to go back to the exploit. I couldn't have gone to college. I couldn't. I could have, but I know about myself that I wouldn't have kept it up, because one of the things about having so little self-worth is you're like, I just won't go. I won't do that. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. And so you get into a college course. You're like, this could really turn my life around, and it would do if you were in a normal, stable part of your life. But because you're not, you let it fall to the wayside, and then that's over, and then you have to explain why you're not at college anymore, and then there's a funding issue, and all that becomes an issue, and everything becomes very complicated. Whereas with, I was very lucky that basically a guardian angel swooped in and just took me out for just long enough to give me time to get my feet back on myself. But I had no responsibilities. It was no problem for me to get out of it by going, I can pick up a bag, or not even pick up a bag, and go and sleep on someone's sofa. I don't have responsibilities. I don't have a family to look after. I don't have anyone to feed. I just have to get myself to the end of the day. For a lot of other people, and I was very young, so it's far easier to bounce back from that. I think for other people that would be incredibly difficult, and even having someone come in and go, you can sleep on the sofa, and it doesn't really help a lot of people necessarily.
But I think it's interesting what you're saying about the self-esteem, and I think a lot of if the system could get it right, the other thing that there's so many projects that are doing really interesting things with the arts and things like that actually I think do massively
and
also have a really important
really
part to play. I don't know if you've heard of Cardboard Citizens, a great theatre company who do this lovely model where they tour hostels with a production. You can stop them, and you can go up and you can finish the story, and then you can come to a workshop afterwards. And then if you enjoyed the workshop, you can come to their amateur theatre company, and when you've done your sort of traineeship through the amateur, you can end up being a professional actor for them, and then going back and touring the hostels. So you've got this kind of lovely
an arc.
Yeah, arc, which I just always think is such a nice kind of journey.
It's incredible how the arts really can sort of play that kind of role, like a therapeutic role almost. I
think there's a social aspect to it that you definitely lose in homelessness.
Yeah, you
lose
become
that social.
Did you feel like you were just a kind of
element
in the system almost?
Yeah, I only really spoke to other people in it, because it's impossible to describe to someone else what's going on. You feel like, especially, coming from a fairly middle-class background, you talk to the people and they're like, I'm going home to my parents' house because I'm going to have tea. And I'm like, that's nice.
Yeah.
I don't think I've got any food, so I'm not going to have any tea. But so you get that, but you become quite changed. And I didn't, if it hadn't been for that youth theatre, it was effectively just a club that you could all go to, and everyone was equal, and no one really cared what you're doing outside. And that was my social life. But there was, like I was saying, the guy who I shared a room with, who ended up being on heroin for quite a long time, he didn't. He became friends with other people that were in the system or had been in the system, and that's just the path he took. And I was very lucky to go a different direction.
Yeah.
And I think there is a real lack of social thing, and I didn't know about that, but it's something. Just go and meet people that are normal, who are not normal, but people who are
in
the
that
system,
situation.
who will talk to you as though
you can just be yourself.
Yeah, just be yourself, like, have a fun time, and not worry about it.
Not have to explain yourself.
Yeah, exactly, and not feel a little bit. There is a lot of shame attached to what is it you do?
Yeah.
Nothing, and I can't. So
Stigma was one of the...
Yeah.
I used to edit a little magazine called The Pavement, which is... it's a kind of resource for people who are homeless, particularly when they're street homeless. So it has got, you know, those emergency services of day centres and where to have a shower and, you know, and it's produced in London, but also distributed in Glasgow and Edinburgh. And we've set up kind of groups of people with experience of homelessness to write and create content. And shame and stigma was one of the main things that kept coming up for the London group, certainly. They said it was a thing that held them back. It's a thing that stopped them from asking for the help they needed. The thing that kept them trapped a lot of the time.
Maybe just knowing there's help out there. I think it was quite... I was struck by what you were saying, just that these activities take you out of the daily grind, which is just surviving, essentially, just getting through, you know, navigating a system and just trying to ensure that you have somewhere for the night and just being able to let go a little bit and live
be a
little.
human like all of us.
Absolutely.
And you never know these things as well. You know, it's you know, if I'd said to my dole officer, "Oh, I'm going to a youth theatre," you know, you can't do that, you're wasting time. And then you turn and go, well, joke's on you, it's my job now.
Yes.
So turns out that pot washing job in Montpellier is unnecessary. Give me 20 years and I will put this half an acting degree to use.
Well, I think you've done quite well out of your acting training. You have. I rather enjoy your little telly series.
It's all written down. We do it with an autocue. It's not hard.
Now, hang on. As someone who works from an autocue, I take exception to that.
Yes, but I imagine internally you also agree.
And also the fact that a lot of your large body of work is sending up people like me. So actually, I'm going to stop being so nice to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop being as nice to you. I've just realised, so we're trying to work off a list of questions here. I'm not sure if I've asked any of them. This has just been completely free form. But I am aware that we've been working away. Let's just see, is there anything, you know, while we try and sort of wind this up, what sort of things do you guys think are the most important things that any listener should take away from this? And certainly bear in mind, you know, our listeners are worldwide. I'm very aware we've been talking specifically about the case in Scotland, but I'm okay with that because I think every country has its own. You were saying that in Finland, they've been dealing with homelessness quite successfully.
America's got a very different system because of its mental health issues.
It's
and things.
very, very different. So, you know, I'm glad that we're focusing on the situation in Scotland, the fact that we have preconceptions about homelessness, and these things are very, you know, our preconceptions are just, you know, it don't often correspond to the situation. But in terms of our discussions today, if there's anything that our listeners could take away, if there's anything that you guys think we haven't perhaps touched on that is super important when it comes to this issue, what do you think that would be? Basically, what have I not covered in this list of questions? This like slapdash bit of...
Something that shocks me quite often when I talk to people about homelessness, and you know, it comes up because it's happened to me, is people don't realise it's been them. You're talking to someone going, yeah, I've never been homeless. I mean, I slept on a friend's sofa for a year, and you're like, it sounds pretty homeless, man. I mean, there's lots of times where you go, that's not good or normal. A lot of people, I've known people that have been in supported accommodation, and they've been like, oh, that's not really homeless. But it is, and you did it. And like, yeah, because of that stigma, they don't want to let anyone know, as though it's like, because if I say that, they'll think I mean on the street. And you're like, well, people need to stop thinking that. Basically,
we need to stop thinking
you can't see people that are homeless. Most of the people you see, people you see, there's behind every one of those people is 5 people who have a roof for the night, who feel just as lost and miserable as you can imagine they would.
And I guess that the stigma attaches to a lot of the issues that might make you more likely to end up homeless, whether that's child abuse. A lot of people have been abused as children who end up homeless just because unable to cope with trauma and self-medicating, which leads you into addictions, mental health. All those things are associated. And I think if we don't create spaces for people to talk about things that were not ever their fault, that, you know... Because
we do tend to think they must have done something to get in that situation.
Well, there was no therapy. I remember that about my entire process, 2 years. Not a suggestion of you want to go and talk to someone about this? The only time it came up was that I needed to get a backdated sick line. And they went, just go and say you're depressed to the doctor and they'll backdate a sick line for you. That was the only time anyone
thinking
suggested
that you might actually be depressed.
I think I can probably get this one through all right, But there's no, no, and you're absolutely right, people with...
And not to say that everyone who ends up homeless has got issues either. But there could be very good reasons why people are struggling to cope with the things that we might all just take for granted as rational steps. I don't know. I think educating yourself, trying to understand what might be going on.
Just trying to understand it, really, and widen our perceptions. And like I say, I'm a journalist, I work in television, so I'm very aware of, the challenges we have in reporting this. I'm aware of the intention behind it. None of this is done deliberately to make people think, homelessness equals X.
I'm the same. I'll have done,
So it's very much but I agree. I think we should be widening our perceptions and trying to understand more. And it is so complex. I mean, it isn't just, someone lying on a doorway. It is so complex. There are so many different layers, so many different reasons why something might happen, so many different consequences. Some people may be affected in different ways. It's such a minefield, but once you get sucked into it, I guess getting out of it is just...
Yeah. It's both really complex, but then really simple at the end of the day. We all have a right to a home. We all have a right to have good, loving relationships around us and, sort of trying to unpick those layers while not getting too distracted in just the basic, let's do everything we can to stop it happening to people.
Excellent. Well, conversations such as these, I hope, are some way to going towards, I guess, understanding this a little bit better. I know that I certainly feel I understand it a little bit more. I don't understand you at all, James, but that's just that is just me. But I do want to say thank you very much for having this conversation today. It's a bit of a different one on the Outwith podcast, but I think it's still, it's important. I think it's important we talk about how we're reporting these kind of stories as well. And I certainly appreciate both your honesty, James, you in particular. And if any of our listeners do want to hear more from our contributors today, James, you are on Twitter, JW Devoy.
That's me.
Also part of the satirical news programme. So your Dateline 2018.
I suspect we'll have to change that name at some point.
Dateline Scotland. There are so many Datelines.
There were many. They always have Dateline at the start.
They do. So what we'll do is we'll pop some of those, when we tweet this out, we'll pop some of these examples out. It is actually quite funny. We were watching it earlier today, actually, and having a good old chortle in the kitchen. So do check out James's work. It's fantastic. Thank you also, Karin. If you want to hear more from Karin Goodwin, she is on Karin_Goodwin on Twitter. You're also published in the Ferret. That's where, and we're big fans of the Ferret here on the Outwith podcast. It is, of course, the independent and award-winning investigative news site. Nosing up the trousers of power, I think, is the tagline there. I rather like that. And they do, of course, get the scoops here in Scotland, oftentimes before the larger media organisations. And they go in-depth in a way that we like to do on the podcast here, which is why we are delighted to be partnering up with them. We love the Ferret. The Ferret, I hope, loves us. So we've managed to wangle some kind of a discount for our listeners. If you go to theferret.scot and sign up with the code OUTWITH19, you will either get your first 3 months free, or you will get £9 off an annual subscription. And the annual subscription is not really that much. So this works out around about a third off. Yeah. So I think you're doing rather well.
It's a good deal, but it's a good deal even without the discount, Hala.
It certainly is. But we're pushing the discount because we have a vested interest.
And we do love you as well. So yeah.
We've got to pay some bills here, Karin. So do sign up here. Show your love. Show your love for the Outwith podcast. Show your love for the Ferret. It is a fantastic publication. And of course, it is good to support independent, in-depth investigations. So here to that. We will be back with you very soon, hopefully, in the kitchen. I'll try and drink less wine next time.
Just realised we're on camera and there's going to be lots of footage of me just chinning wine all the way through that.
We're definitely having those shots. It has been great having you with us. Do remember to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcast. That way you will be sure to get the next thrilling installment of the podcast. Leave us a review as well. Please leave a nice one. That's just to keep me sweet. And hope to chat with you again soon.